They were already packed when I came in from the back field. 3 suitcases by the door, sunscreen on the kitchen counter, and my daughter-in-law laughing at something on her phone like it was the most ordinary Tuesday morning in the world. I stood there in my work boots, dirt on my hands, 67 years old, and I understood, not slowly, the way understanding usually comes to a man my age, but all at once, like stepping through ice. I had built everything they were standing in. Every board, every fence post, every season of it. My name is not important right now. What matters is that I am a farmer from outside of Antigonish, Nova Scotia, and I have worked this land since I was 19 years old. My wife Colleen passed 8 years ago. Cancer, quick and merciless. And after that it was just me and the property and the rhythm of the seasons. My son moved back 3 years ago with his wife and her mother in tow, and I told myself it was good. A man gets lonely. A farm needs more than one pair of hands. I told myself a lot of things. My son's name. I'll call him by his relationship to me because that's what this story is really about. My son was 38. His wife, I'll call her my daughter-in-law. Her mother had been living in the spare room since February, which was supposed to be just until she finds her footing, which is a phrase that apparently has no defined endpoint in their vocabulary. I should have paid closer attention to the small things. That's what I know now. It started the previous autumn, when my daughter-in-law began asking questions about the deed. Casual questions, the kind you almost don't register because they're wrapped in pleasantness. Over dinner, while passing the salt. "Dad, is this property solely in your name still?" That kind of thing. I said yes. I didn't think twice. Then there were the phone calls my son started making from the barn, which struck me as odd because the barn has always had terrible reception, and he knew that. I'd catch pieces of conversations when the wind was wrong. Numbers. Acreage. Market value. I told myself he was probably looking into equipment loans, maybe expanding the operation. He'd mentioned it before. I gave him the benefit of every doubt a father has to give. The property is worth somewhere around $1.2 million now. I know that because my neighbor Alistair, who has farmed the land next to mine for 30 years and doesn't mince words, told me what the parcel 2 concessions oversold for last spring and did the math out loud while leaning on my fence post. I hadn't thought about the number much before that. It was always just home. After Alistair said that number, I started sleeping a little less soundly. The morning I came in from the field and found the suitcases, I asked where they were going. My son said they'd booked a trip to Prince Edward Island. 10 days. Him, his wife, her mother. He said it with the ease of someone who had been practicing the sentence. He smiled. His wife was still looking at her phone. I asked when they'd decided this. Last week, he said. Just a spontaneous thing. I asked who was going to handle the morning feeding, the afternoon checks on the east fence that had been giving trouble, the delivery from the co-op on Thursday. He looked at me the way adults sometimes look at elderly parents when they think patience is charity. He said I'd managed fine before they came back. He said it'd only be 10 days. He said Alistair could probably help if I needed anything. Then they left. They actually left. I stood in my own kitchen listening to the sound of the car going down the gravel drive. My daughter-in-law's mother gave a little wave from the back window, which I thought was a remarkable thing to do under the circumstances. I fed the animals. I checked the fence. I did what needed doing because the land doesn't wait for a man to finish being hurt. That night I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Colleen's chair was across from me, the way it always is. I don't move it. I think more clearly when it's there. I thought about the deed questions. I thought about the barn phone calls. I thought about the way my son had said spontaneous with that particular evenness in his voice that I'd heard once before, when he was 16 and told me he hadn't been at his friend's house the night of the accident on the county road. I went to my filing cabinet. I keep things organized. Colleen taught me that, and some lessons you carry with you permanently. The property documents were exactly where they should be. But there was a piece of paper behind the folder that I didn't put there. A printed email exchange, 2 pages, between my son and a real estate lawyer in Halifax. The dates were from November. It was now June. I read it twice. Then I sat very still for a while. The email discussed what would be required to list a property when one co-owner was the primary named resident, and how power of attorney documents could streamline a sale process, and what the general timeline looked like once the elder party had signed. The phrase elder party was used 3 times. That was me. I was the elder party. I want to be honest about what I felt, because I think honesty is the whole point of telling this. I didn't feel rage right away. What I felt first was a particular kind of grief, not the sharp grief of losing Colleen, but something slower and heavier. The grief of recognizing that the person you raised had quietly decided that your remaining years were an obstacle to be managed. Then the rage came, and it was considerable. I'm not a man who acts quickly when angry. Colleen used to say that was my best quality and my worst one. I made myself a cup of tea. I sat with it until it was cold. Then I picked up the phone and called my friend Wahlberga. Wahlberga has been my accountant for 22 years. She is 71, sharp as a steel edge. And she lost her own husband to a stroke 4 years ago, so she understands the particular vulnerability of people our age who suddenly find themselves managing everything alone. She listened to me describe what I'd found. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Gus, you need to be at the bank when it opens tomorrow morning, and you need to bring that paper." I told her I hadn't decided what I wanted to do yet. She said, "Yes, you have. You decided when you called me." She was right. She usually is. The bank branch in town opens at 9:30. I was there at 9:25. The manager, a man named Bertrand, who I'd known casually for years because his father used to buy hay from me, sat me down in his office and I explained the situation in plain terms. I showed him the email I'd found. I told him I had reason to believe someone might attempt to make changes to accounts or property arrangements using documents I had not willingly signed. Bertrand was careful and professional. He flagged my accounts for additional verification requirements. He also gave me the name of a lawyer in town who specialized in estate matters and elder financial issues. And he said it gently, without making me feel diminished by the word elder, which I appreciated. I was at the lawyer's office by 11. Her name was Miss Carmichael. Bertrand had called ahead, which I hadn't expected and was grateful for. She was perhaps 50, with reading glasses on a chain, and the focused calm of someone who has heard difficult stories without being made ruthless by them. I showed her the email. She asked me several questions, careful ones. She explained what I already suspected, that the email itself wasn't evidence of a crime, but it was evidence of intent that I was entitled to protect myself against. She helped me understand my options clearly. I left her office 2 hours later with a plan and a referral for a second appointment the following week. I went home and fed the animals and fixed the east fence properly, the way it should have been done 2 weeks ago when I'd first noticed the problem, and asked my son to handle it. The next morning, my neighbor from across the road, a woman named Philida, whose husband had been in my year at school and who has brought me casseroles approximately once a month since Colleen died, which is a kindness I have never adequately thanked her for. Philida came walking up the drive with a look on her face that told me she had something to say. She'd overheard something. Her kitchen window faces the road, and she said my daughter-in-law had been on the phone in the driveway 2 days before they left, pacing back and forth. And Philida has good hearing, and the call had been about the property and a timeline, and whether the old man, that was the phrase that had been used, whether the old man would put up a fuss. She was upset telling me this. She kept apologizing for not coming sooner, and I kept telling her she hadn't done anything wrong. The thing is, by then I had already been to the bank. I had already been to Miss Carmichael. The protective steps were already taken, but hearing the old man said that way, hearing that I was someone in my own home who might put up a fuss, that settled something in my chest that has not fully unsettled since. I called my son on the 4th day they were away. He answered on the 2nd ring, which surprised me. His voice was easy, relaxed. The coast will do that to a person when they believe everything is going according to plan. I told him I'd been going through some paperwork. He said that was good. Stay busy, Dad. I told him I found some interesting correspondence in the filing cabinet. A pause, very small. A person who wasn't listening for it wouldn't have noticed it. He said he didn't know what I was talking about. I told him I thought he probably did. I told him I'd spoken to Walberda and I'd been to the bank, and I'd also met with a lawyer who had given me some very useful information. I told him all of that the same way I'd tell him the weather forecast. Flat. Even. 67 years of knowing when to raise your voice and when the absence of any heat at all does more work. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said the email was just exploratory, just looking into options. He said they'd been worried about what happened to the farm if something happened to me. I told him I appreciated that concern and that I'd addressed it myself, and that it would no longer be necessary for him to pursue options on my behalf. Another pause. He said, "Dad?" I said, 10 days. Enjoy PEI. I hung up. 2 days later, his wife tried to use one of the shared household cards at a restaurant in Charlottetown. I know this because Bertrand had flagged the account and a notification came through to my phone. I hadn't intended to freeze anything. I'd only asked for the additional verification requirements, but it turned out the card had a daily limit that her spending pattern had exceeded, which triggered a hold automatically. She called me, my daughter-in-law. From what I could hear in the background, it was an outdoor restaurant, probably a patio, music somewhere. She was polite, in the way people are polite when they are furious and need something from you. She explained there was a problem with the card. I told her I was aware cards sometimes have limits. She said this was unusual, and could I look into it? I told her I'd look into a lot of things. She thanked me and hung up. Within 4 minutes, my son called. This time his voice was different. The coast relaxed, was gone. He asked what was going on with the accounts. I told him I'd been reviewing our financial arrangements and had put some precautionary measures in place. I used Miss Provenance, Carmichael's language, because it was good language, precise and legally considered, and it had the intended effect of making clear that I had not arrived at this position accidentally. He asked why. I told him I thought we both knew why, and that I preferred to have that conversation in person. He said they were coming home early. I told him that was up to them. They came back in 6 days instead of 10. I was repairing the lean-to on the south side of the property when the car came up the drive, and I kept working because the lean-to needed to be repaired and because finishing what you started is a principle I have not abandoned. My son came to find me. He looked tired. His wife and her mother stayed in the house, which was the right instinct, all things considered. We stood in the yard and he tried several approaches. The first was that I'd misunderstood the email. The second was that they'd only been trying to plan ahead. The third was that I was overreacting because I'd been alone too long and wasn't seeing things clearly. That third one was a mistake. He knew it as soon as he said it. I could see it register, but it had already come out. I looked at him for a long moment. I thought about what his mother would have said. Colleen had a way of finding the exact word that made argument pointless without cruelty. I tried to do that. I said, "I built this place before you were born. I kept it when your mother got sick. I kept it when she died. I am not overreacting, and I am not confused. I know what I found, and I know what it means." He started to say something, and I held up one hand. I said, "I have an appointment with Ms. Carmichael next week to review the estate documents. I'm having the property put in a trust. You'll be in it, but the conditions will be clear. What those conditions are will depend significantly on what the next several months look like." He was quiet. I said, "I'm not your enemy, but I'm not going to be managed." We stood there a while. The afternoon was cool the way Nova Scotia afternoons in June can be, that specific, clean, gray-green coolness you don't get anywhere else. A red-winged blackbird called from the fence line. He said he was sorry. I don't know yet if he meant it in the full way a person needs to mean it, or just in the way that relieves immediate pressure. Time will be the answer to that. I told him I heard him. That evening I called Walberga and told her how it had gone. She said, "Good. Just that." She's known me long enough to know I don't need more. The months that followed were not uncomplicated. My daughter-in-law was cold to me for several weeks, the kind of cold that fills a house efficiently, finding every corner. Her mother ate her meals in her room more often. My son worked hard, harder than he had been actually, which I noticed and didn't comment on because some things are better absorbed than said. Ms. Carmichael reviewed everything and helped me establish the trust with terms that protected the property and were transparent to my son about what they were and why. I had her explain it to him directly at the second meeting, which she offered to do and which I thought was the right approach. He asked questions. They were reasonable questions. That meant something. I also met with Felita and Alistair for coffee one Saturday morning and told them broadly what had happened and thanked them for being people I could count on. Felita cried a little and then apologized for crying, and Alistair said he'd always thought my daughter-in-law had eyes that were slightly too close together, which made no logical sense as an assessment, but which I found unexpectedly comforting. By autumn, something had shifted, gradually, the way seasons shift on the farm, not with a single dramatic moment, but with 10,000 small, cumulative ones. My daughter-in-law began sitting at the kitchen table for meals again. She asked me once about how I decided when to rotate the east field. A farming question. Genuine curiosity. I answered it. It was a start. Her mother, turned out, had opinions about bread. She started baking on Sunday mornings. The house smelled different. Better. I didn't say anything about it. I just ate the bread. I'm not telling the story because it ended neatly, because it hasn't, entirely. Trust is not a thing you rebuild in one autumn. But I am 67 years old, and I have learned that holding bitterness is expensive, and I cannot afford to spend my remaining seasons that way. What I know is this. I found a paper behind a folder in a filing cabinet. I made 2 phone calls. I sat with 2 professionals who treated me like a man capable of making his own decisions. I made those decisions, and the land is still mine. Not as a fortress to defend against my family, but as the place I intend to die in, surrounded by the seasons I have always measured my life against, on my own terms, in my own time. Colleen's chair is still across the table from mine. Some nights I sit there, and I think she would have handled all of this with more grace than I did. She probably would have seen it coming earlier, too, and found a way to address it that left everyone's dignity intact. But she's not here, and I am, and I managed. That, I have decided, is enough.